If someone is a culture fit but doesn't have the hard skills, I'm more likely to want them at the company rather than the other way around, where they have the hard skills but they don't have the culture fit.
How do you know how to define the culture for your particular company?
Yeah, that's a really cool question. The rocket science might not necessarily be in the culture definition. Our culture basically revolves around this key promise.
Welcome to the Startup Huddle. I'm your host, Josef Maruščák, and I'm excited to introduce you to the current and upcoming leaders of the startup tech world. We'll discuss digital products and key takeaways for life and professional growth. So grab a coffee and let's huddle up. Welcome everyone to another episode. Today we are here with Tomas Sakal, who is a great friend of mine, also one of the HR leaders in a large company called Bloomreach. Tomas started in the previous company that was actually acquired by Bloomreach, so he's been through several stages of the life cycle of the company. And so we're going to talk about culture, recruitment, very HR-focused topic today. Welcome, Tomas, and thanks very much for joining.
Thank you, Jean. I'm excited to be here.
So to start, and maybe we should go quickly a little bit through your background. So what exactly is your role at Bloomreach, and a few sentences about how you got there.
Yeah. So I'm a director of recruitment at Bloomreach. I lead the talent acquisition efforts across our geos. I'm also in charge of talent acquisition operations and employer branding, but I also help out with various change management and productivity topics across the company. I joined the company 6 years ago. I spent time in client services, but also in product and marketing, and I landed in the people team 3 years ago.
Very cool. And what if you could give us maybe a few sentences about what the company is doing so that the listeners can sort of better understand what industry you are in?
Yeah. So Bloomreach essentially helps e-commerce companies create great customer experiences for their end customers. So what we do is we help e-commerce companies, one, with findability, so that customers on the websites have intelligent AI-powered search so that they can find what they're looking for as fast as possible. But also we help with the activation and conversion of customers through omni-channel experiences, and we power this with an underlying customer data engine that basically helps our customers understand both the customers and their products in one place.
Very nice. And it's kind of successful company, right? How many employees and the revenue currently, and maybe where the company was when you firstly joined?
Yeah, so I joined way back when there were about 60, 70 employees. I do not remember the revenue at the time. Now, after the acquisition and growth, we're at 930 in terms of employees, and we're north of 150 mil in terms of revenue.
Nice. And so it's a kind of a huge company. You've seen it from the very beginning. So given all the different aspects of your job that you're currently doing, so if you could maybe summarize like what exactly you are taking care of, what does it mean to be the director of recruitment, talent acquisition, and also what are other aspects of HR your role encompasses?
Yeah. So we basically take care of recruitment of new people across our geos. So we have employees in the US, in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, and also in India. And we recruit across these locations. We have folks in all of these locations who help us recruit in-house. And we take care of the whole recruitment lifecycle. So basically, from the very beginning of having that role planned and budgeted for, all the way through the role definition, the reach out, the interviews, and then the final culture interview, giving the offer, and then for the onboarding, we hand it over to the people operations team. And then of course all the systems and analytics around this, and we also help out with other people analytics areas thanks to having that analyst capacity on the team, through our great talent acquisition ops analyst. And we we also help out mainly through like projects that I work on. I help out with productivity and change management initiatives across the company. So during the summer, we ran a benchmarking exercise comparing Bloomreach to other top companies in terms of headcount and financials, and also with like upcoming sort of org changes, sort of helping structure that and align everyone so that the change goes smoothly both for the business and for the employee engagement.
In terms of HR generally, so I understand that you are right now more on the recruitment side of things, but what would be the key role of the HR in an organization, whether it's a startup or a larger company? Maybe there is a difference.
Right. So for smaller companies, mainly what HR teams look for and what also our HR team was focused on is mainly recruitment, and then working with the leadership of the company to to establish and keep reinforcing a really strong sense of culture, so that there are enough high quality members of the team who are really passionate about the company. And what's really important at that stage, especially in recruitment, is not necessarily the experience of the hires, but more their growth mindset and their ability to cope with new situations. Now, as companies grow and also perhaps closer to the stage where we are, what's important to think about is not just bring in these people, because then the recruitment, the new hires might be a smaller share of the overall employee base. So what starts getting more important is how do we work with all the employees that we already have on board. And that's where the topic of productivity comes in, because it's already not enough to have high performing engaged employees, but it also needs to be continuously reevaluated whether the overall setup and the model of the business is productive enough for where we want to get. Because companies are, especially at this growth stage, are not evaluated just on their overall growth number, but also on um, rule of 40, for example, the productivity and efficiency of how they get there.
So one of the things that you touched upon is culture, for example, right? And I understand that there are different ways probably and different tools how you can get people to be, as you said, in early stage startup, uh, right fit for their role, and also like culturally very passionate about the company. And then there are different set of tools probably when we are talking later stage, where you need to make sure that the whole large organization with like different departments, incentives, etc., they work together. In terms of the culture, so it's kind of a buzzword. Everyone talks about it. We are also running almost 100 people organization right now, which is obviously quite smaller compared to Bloomreach, but we're also quite interested in culture and are doing our best to make sure that it's properly set up and that people act upon it. What is, in your understanding, the culture, and how do you incentivize people to? Or let's start with the first one. So, what do you understand as a culture in a company?
The definition of culture that I'm used to is a set of clearly defined behaviors, right? So the way we also talk about it in interviews is, how do people behave when no one's looking?
And what would you say is the? So, for example, let's talk about Bloomreach so that people can understand. So, what is, for example, the culture there, and what are those clearly defined sets of behaviors?
Our culture basically revolves around this key promise, which we call the commitment culture, right? And that is that Bloomreach is committed to making the time at Bloomreach for Bloomreachers the most impactful professional experience of their lives. And then in turn, the employees are committed to making Bloomreach successful, right? That's the sort of handshake that is at the core of the culture. And then when you dive one level deeper, we define culture through the 5 values that we have: truth, own, we, think, and no drama. And now these 5 values are then further broken down into a total of 10 key behaviors, right? Because let's say when you say own, different people imagine different things. All right. For a person coming from a small organization, own means everyone is doing everything, right? Because that's what smaller teams are like. But then if you're in a larger organization, own might mean everyone knows exactly what they're doing, right? And so, in order to define this clearly and to make sure that everyone across our geos and functions and with the different backgrounds that we have is aligned on this, this is one of the key behaviors that we have, right? Everyone is empowered by having clearly defined goals, right? Um, and they know exactly what they should be focused on. And the key behaviors are public. We have them on our website, right? We talk about them during the interview process, and we also have them implemented in our various, tools and processes to make sure the culture is visible and reinforced.
And what you talk about is quite like very specific. I guess that maybe like compared to for example, the culture of Sudolabs, there definitely will be some differences. How do you know how to define the culture for your particular company and for your particular stage?
Yeah, that's a really, really cool question. So that's a difficult one because then you're looking at one, what set of behaviors will make us successful, right? And two, you're also looking at, okay, so what describes us, what is familiar to us, and what is specific to us, right? And both of these things have to be taken into account. Of course, on the other on the one extreme, if you create a culture just like top down, like in a laboratory in an ivory tower, it's not going to resonate with people. They're not going to follow it. It's not going to be their language, right? um, but on the other hand, if you make it only about what people want and what people feel like, then you're neglecting the key things that you need in the recipe to create a successful company, right? So when we say culture eats strategy for breakfast, there's two pieces to it, right? It's well defined and people live it day to day.
You said that culture sort of cannot be completely uh, outside from like what the people in the company are. Like, do
Yeah.
you define culture at the moment where there are four people in the company, essentially the founders, or necessarily the first people you choose to work with, you then define the culture for the rest of the company, at least for certain stages? How much can
Yeah.
you how much can you know from the how much can you structure it as a like a systematic predefined thing, and how much is it like really dependent on several different things that are happening randomly in the company, such as the first hires, for example?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a really difficult challenge. So, for example, the story of Bloomreach was that the the basis of the culture was set in stone before the company even started, right? And it's been constant ever since. However, the key behaviors and sort of the underlying sort of specifics that has evolved over time, right? Because again, a smaller company needs something slightly different from what a larger one needs to succeed, right? So the Bloomreach story is basically creating the notion of the commitment culture and the five values and sticking to that, and then looking at, how do we interpret those values and how do we understand those values over the years according to the current stage of the company, so that it is still in line with what we believe in and who we are, but it's also relevant for the behaviors that we need to succeed.
Still, if I was to set up a company, let's say that I'm starting a new venture, and I have like three co-founders with me. We got the investment. We are thinking about the first hires. How do we think about the culture at that point, and how much it is important, and maybe what tools can I use to understand what the culture is about and set it up properly at that point in time?
To be clear, I don't have experience with this stage. However, the general approach that, or one of the approaches that can be considered, is, first, between the first founders, when folks are starting up, I assume there's already some sort of baseline chemistry, and you don't sort of need really formal mechanisms to really say things explicitly. But yes, once you start adding more people, it is critical that you find those like strongly engaged people that really care about the company, and can then be the flag bearers, the pole bearers for the next people that join, because these people will be the core of the future larger company. And so for that, initially, even if the founders maybe don't have a strong opinion on culture, which I would assume they would, right? What is possible is just putting together a few key principles of what we believe about how we behave, right? And thinking about how to make them specific enough so that they can agree on them and hold each other accountable to them, but also then creating some space for interpretation for the future when, let's say, we cross a particular mark, like of 100 people, and at that point, not everyone knows everyone by name anymore, right? They're not on a first name basis. Then it would then, at that point, companies would reevaluate the exact specifics of the behaviors or operating principles, like Stripes calls them, or whatever. um, but it would be, again, along the similar lines, but with slightly different interpretation to adjust for the scenario. But what they can start with is, a short list. It doesn't have to be like any rocket science, but it needs to be something that the founders and the first team members really strongly believe in, both for themselves, but also what will make the company successful.
That makes sense, and I think that it's been something that we also experienced recently in Sudolabs, where at some point we realized that, one, the market is changing quite a lot. Two, like the company is growing, and we also had to like reevaluate the values, but still like somehow stay in where we were before. So it seems to be necessary that because of the ever changing market and the environment, and also the company stage, there you need to sort of require, let's say, different sets of behaviors to achieve the business goal, and therefore the culture needs to shape as well, right?
Yeah, but I think something that's important to remember here, the rocket science might not necessarily be in the culture definition.
Mhm.
The rocket science, however, is in the culture implementation and how you live the culture. Because that's like most often the problem, right? Like, you put these amazing things on paper and you put them up on walls, but then you don't use them every day, and you don't pay attention to them regularly. And so I think if someone in the early stages is really thinking about, how to get culture right, it's more about, yes, having a good sort of sensible time to put it together and create something that makes sense. But the real energy and the real difficulty comes in the implementation and the adherence with the culture.
And that was exactly where I wanted to ask. And how do you, so let's say you define those values, you define the culture. Now, how do you implement it actually? I've seen companies and maybe even like NGOs where, like, almost it felt to me like before, like once a week they were all almost, let's say, learning the all the values and the sets of behaviors by heart, and they were repeating it to each other. It was
Okay.
always at every presentation. The first slide was like, what are our values?
Yeah.
I've also seen companies, and I think that also is kind of a Sudolabs topic, like an example of Sudolabs, where we don't seem to enforce it that much, or it's not
Mm.
that, like, it's not the our day to day
Mhm.
key focus. What is the right amount there, if you can say, and how to do it?
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Um, so I would say talking about it in meetings is just one piece of the puzzle, right? And when talking about it is not backed up by action, obviously that is counterintuitive to people, and then they have reactions to it, right? But so something that I'm used to thinking about in this context is a framework called the influence model, which basically has four components of any campaign or project or program that is supposed to ensure like change of behavior in an organization, right? What the first piece is, people understand the why behind what we're doing, right? And this is what you mentioned was, okay, so let's recap the values, but why is it important to have a strong culture? Why do we believe in it so strongly in this particular set of behaviors, right? So that people can understand it rationally. The second piece is seeing others role model the behaviors, right? And this starts with leaders, but it also starts with the early adopters and the influencers in the organization who perhaps are not leaders but are strong voices, right? Um, so they need to be, again, the pole bearers, the bar raisers, who sort of role model the culture so that other people see them living it and talking about it. The third point is make it easy for people to live the culture, right? Because maybe you can say, okay, you have to proactively give feedback and communicate to prevent drama, right? Like we have in our key behaviors. But we don't say, okay, this is the definition and now go and have fun with it, right? So we actually have an in-house communications coach, we have trainings, we have materials people can come back to. So we support people in living those key behaviors specifically so that it's easy for them. And the last point is the formal mechanisms and incentive structures reflect the culture, right? So, for example, what we do is we have this incorporated in performance management. We have this incorporated in our recruitment process to have discussions around the values and the culture at particular touch points in the different processes where it matters. So it's not about mentioning it in the meeting, it's about the hiring decision being influenced by the culture fit. It's about the performance rating and therefore also the career growth of that person being influenced by the degree to which they're a culture fit, right? So that's how you implement it then in the formal incentive structure. So those are the four pieces that I'm used to working with for really ingraining the culture in the day to day.
Let's talk about the make it easy part. You mentioned that so again, so like an open feedback culture and sort of no drama principle there.
Yeah.
What are the particular measures that you, for example, implemented? Because you mentioned coaches and some materials. Like it's kind of a hard thing to do, right? Not many people, and especially like in certain parts of the world, are used to like giving the feedback openly. Is also something you need to learn,
Right.
and a very unpleasant all in all. Like it might be normal in American companies or like fully American companies where again like longer tradition there. So getting, for example, to this example, like how are you solving that particular problem?
Being aware of the differences is the first step, right? Like obviously you have different behaviors around culture around the world, and also between different departments, right? So you would naturally have more extroverted people in sales compared to engineering, right? So there are definitely going to be differences, but the work of the people team and the work of the leadership of the company is first about recognizing those differences and talking about them and putting them on the table, right? And then creating such an environment where the enablement is tailored to those uh, different starting points, perhaps for the different cohorts of employees, right? Because um, for Eastern Europeans, it might be about how to be kinder when delivering feedback, right? And For Americans or for people from the UK, it might be about how to even bring it up, you know, um, right? So so there are those differences. So when we look at the enablement, we definitely think about, okay, what are our cohorts, what are they struggling with on the way to living that behavior, and how can we close that gap, right? Because one thing is doing cookie cutter measures, and the other thing is actually tackling the thing that is keeping you from achieving what you want, which in this case is people giving each other quality, sort of rational, no nonsense feedback, right?
And then what about the people that do not fit? Like obviously, then it might be probably the problem of the. Uh, it might be a mistake of the recruitment process. It might also be that the culture has changed. Uh, how do you work with people that do not fit the culture currently?
I mean, oftentimes you would hear people say, if someone is a culture fit but doesn't have the hard skills, I'm more likely to want them at the company rather than the other way around, where they have the hard skills but they don't have the culture fit, right? um, and that is the approach that we also have, right? So when we look for people and we have that space to look for someone with a growth mindset and they want to grow and we want them to grow into the role, which in many cases is the approach that we take, um, the culture is so much more important than the current state of the hard skills, because hard skills and soft skills can be coached and learned over time, and people can grow into that. However, culture is something that has a much longer timeline, even if it does, of changing, right? So then when after someone joins and we see evidence that there actually has been, a lack of a culture fit, um, then we inevitably part ways with that employee, which is different from, not having the right hard skills for that particular role, right? So for us, culture is incredibly important, and we believe that, when it is not there, there is simply, not a fit with working for the organization.
That is quite like surprising for me, to be honest. Like from one aspect of it. So which um, so it seems to be that like the things that you see are not changeable by the
Mhm.
individuals are somehow connected to their personality, or like something that has been like evolving for a long time and it's very hard to change, right?
Yeah. So yeah, like the things that are described in our key behaviors, which are, around how we approach problems, what do we believe about collaboration, are often tied to beliefs that people have about, how you work, um, and maybe sort of longer term patterns of behavior, which are really difficult to turn around, especially because any change comes with sort of being aware of the topic, understanding it, and being committed to making that turnaround, right? So if someone not just has a different behavior, but is also convinced that that different behavior is correct, then there simply like isn't a timeline viable for the organization, um, in which they would become culture fit.
And can you give me maybe some examples, and the listeners as well, about those kind of behaviors that simply wouldn't be able to you wouldn't be able to respect in your organization?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So let's say something that is very important to us is along the lines of the truth, we and no drama values, which is about, how do we behave when things don't go well, right? um, And what we expect from the folks at Bloomreach is, looking at the facts of evaluating the situation, and then really looking at, okay, how can we be better together in this situation, and how can we both reflect on maybe um, what could have been done differently, right? And so, for example, if we've had cases where, if folks didn't pass an onboarding test, they faulted the test for it because they said, "Oh, this is impossible. I have never failed the test, so the test must be bad." Right? I mean, it sounds silly, but these things happen, right? Or let's say if someone's team's results are not according to expectations, and they come to a retrospective meeting with like five things that the other team should have done better, right? So in these cases, really, what we expect is the ability to think about, how, yes, how do we collaborate better? But first, how do I communicate proactively to prevent drama? And how do I really reflect on what I could be doing better, and how can I contribute to this situation and be really a constructive participant in this discussion, right? And these are the kinds of things that are absolutely crucial for collaboration to be effective, and for us as a company to be productive, which are unlikely to turn around. And that's where we have like really serious considerations about whether this is or isn't a culture fit with Bloomreach.
It is a very well defined, I guess, approach, and a very good example. I mean, not maybe necessarily we, but and that might be somehow tied to like Eastern Europe and the general, like, I guess that the way how you describe culture and the way how maybe new tech companies describe culture is quite different from what companies and people were used to here. Um, what about like maybe people that are, um, those like at the very basic level personality traits that are not very pleasant, such as, there's like, I guess it's very common in Central Europe that people gossip, on in the corridors. They are not very transparent. They don't tell you what exactly they mean, but they tell it behind your back. This is just one of the examples that just see people talking that I know that are happening in their offices. Like, if how you look at it, like, because uh, can you encompass in the culture and in the values all those negative behaviors, or because it might be that it's not necessarily, what you describe is an elaborate what you describe is an elaborate intellectual concept of how you should approach problems and how you should look at the facts. What about the more basic stuff there?
um, I mean, some behaviors that might be annoying to some people might be just a part of diversity, right? And so I think this is something important to think about, is that culture is often, unfortunately, used as a tool to create a homogenous organization, right? So if that person is looks like me and speaks like me, then they're a culture fit, right? So I think that's why the definition is so important, and that's why the subjectivity is really something to be avoided when we're talking about culture. And this is not just like an abstract diversity problem. In some countries, it might even be like a legal problem, right? So really important to think about. And then, yes, then it is up to the company to define like what are the like you said, what are the behaviors that we will not respect at this organization that are actually hampering our ability to collaborate and are not a part of cultural diversity and differences, right? So I don't know about gossiping, like maybe those behaviors that you mentioned. But for example, if it's about talking behind someone's back, right? Instead of going to them and speaking to them about it, if it really matters to you, then that is something we care about at Bloomreach. Like, we want you to feel empowered, to feel safe and enabled to come up to folks and have that radically candid conversation about, this happened, this is how I felt, can we please chat about it, right? If we see those things, then we feel like it is our responsibility to put that fish on the table and overcome the unpleasantness of that conversation, because we believe at the end of the day it's good both for both the people and the company, to have those unpleasant moments early on, as opposed to letting it fester and bubble into something bigger.
That is indeed like, yeah, again, like I think that a well-defined culture even then from the earlier stages of the company, and or at least like good behavior promotion might avoid quite a many problems between the teams. um you told, when you were speaking in the very beginning, you said that there's this key principle, this key handshake, and that might be an interesting new topic as well, about you being able to give people and your employees the best experience and the growth, and they in return to a certain extent then help the company. How do you make people grow in the organization and make them productive as well?
Yeah. So that's that's the $1 million question, right? Because that's what's oftentimes the key motivator for people to join a new role is to grow, right? And yes, while during the great attrition, when there were like reports about like why people leave or join, um, really growth was among the key attributes and dimensions that people thought about that determined their retention or their joining a new company. And I would say this lives in the context of the other pillars of engagement, which aside from growth is sort of like flexibility and autonomy to do the work in a way that you want to, right? Whether that is like physical autonomy or not having a micromanager for your leader, right? Then it's caring about the people around you and having a strong circle of people that you care about in your workplace. And the last one would be trust in the company and in the leadership, right? So in this context, when we think about growth specifically, something that I'm really proud of at Bloomreach is us having rolled out a comprehensive career architecture framework, which is oriented around job levels, right? And so that really enables us to help people grow in multiple ways. Um, there's maybe four ways. The first one is vertical growth on the individual contributor ladder, right? And that's where we have the exact descriptions of what does it mean to be at this level in terms of behavior, skills, and capabilities, and what does it mean to get to the next one. Very similar in terms of managerial, what it takes. But it is also important to say that, managerial positions are limited in number, right? So that's why we also talk about, how can people contribute really meaningfully on the individual contributor ladder, right? Then it's growing horizontally in terms of transferring between different teams and getting different skill sets that way. And finally, it's growing just within your job level, within your role, and looking, for example, at a competency map for that job, for that level, and looking at how can I continue to build on my strengths while sort of managing my weaknesses just within that, and working with my manager or perhaps with a coach and with external materials to really hone in on my skills right here. So those are the four big ways. And then all like that sort of growth is then enabled by those things that you maybe hear more about, like which is the coach, the personal development budget, like courses, certifications, books, um, whatever. So that is all just tools to help people grow in this career architecture framework.
Interesting. Are there like so I guess that for certain specific roles, there's quite a lot of materials where you can see like sample career ladders, for example. So just to give you an example, for example, we have a very clear structure in Sudolabs in terms of the growth for the engineers and also for like product managers and designers for the whole product
Nice.
department. Whereas we a little bit struggle with like those smaller teams such as marketing or sales, where it's a lot more impromptu, I would say, and very specific for what we do, and we also maybe also underestimated it at some point. Uh, so how do you create those structures, as you just said? Will you be looking at the like firstly generally accepted frameworks firstly, or is it very specific for the organization as well?
No, I think having an external framework as a baseline is super useful because these job levels are not useful just for this. Although this is the sort of the why you would introduce it, right? But it has spillover positive effects on, let's say, benchmarking, right? Suddenly your conversations about salary don't have to be abstract, and it can be about, okay, at this level in this geography for this job, what do people get paid on the market, and where are you compared to that? And if you're an extremely good performer, you should be paid at the top quartile, right? But if you're just starting and we're unsure about your future performance, then being in the bottom, one of the bottom quartiles, is understandable, right? So having an external framework enables you this kind of standardization. But then, of course, these general frameworks are really hard to understand for most people, right? So, what is necessary afterwards is translating this into the language of the organization and then customizing it to the different departments so that the folks in each team are able to understand what it takes to get to the next level in their language, right? Not just the company's language, but in the language of their team. Like, what does that mean specifically? And so that is then the work that has to be done in terms of specification, but having that public sort of already abstract and general framework as a starting point is uh, is really useful, both for starting faster and also for the spillover positive effects.
Very cool. So maybe there are some job to be done on our end as well. I'll call you after the podcast. Yeah. In terms of, I think the last bigger topic I wanted to touch upon was recruitment.
Mhm.
Mm, maybe just to like hop into the topic. What would you do? Because many of the listeners are probably going to be earlier stage companies. How would you choose their first employees based on what principles uh, at the beginning? Let's say founders, they're after the investment hiring their first key employees.
So again, I wouldn't
Yeah.
have direct experience with this, but generally, one of the ways to think about this is in the in the very early stages, what you definitely want is um, not mercenaries, but people who are really super passionate about that topic, right? So you want someone who, like, wakes up in the morning and goes to bed in the evening with the thoughts about the customers that you're trying to serve and that particular vertical and industry, right? And so that's sort of the will axis of the skill will matrix. But when you think about the skill, it is also likely that initially it is very hard for companies to afford someone who already has all the hard skills and sort of they've been through it, right? So oftentimes they would hire someone who is in already has maybe some of the skills, but most importantly, they have a track record of having adapted to new environments, and they have a history of changing their ways of working in the past, which creates a great base of evidence for a growth mindset, right? Because if you think about all the different challenges that are awaiting a new company and the ever growing landscape that that company is going to go through, more than someone knowing a particular process, what you need is someone who, I mean, hopefully has a toolkit that they can use. But even if they don't, it's more important that they're able to adapt to that new situation and somehow come out on the other end with a new skill set, right? And so, and not just having adapted to a new situation, but also when things don't go well, the first question is, how can I do this better? As opposed to what was everyone else's fault? Because the folks who reflect on themselves and how they can change their ways of working are the ones who have the great starting point to start thinking about, okay, how can I learn something theoretically, how can I practice something, how can I seek out senior mentorship on how to overcome this challenge. So those are the types of people that I've seen being recruited for early stage projects.
And how do you recruit them?
Yes, there's different motivations for the types of people that you recruit earlier and later. And as I mentioned, these folks would most likely be passionate about the topic and the impact they can make, and about all the things they can learn on the go. And so that is basically the message and the content you're coming to them with. And then in terms of the go to market and the sourcing, that would then most likely be through a network, right? Because in larger organizations, also how we work is for many positions, you can look for the folks who are sort of one stage earlier in their career compared to the role that we want to hire them for, and that's who we find on LinkedIn and we reach out to them. But in these cases, the network and understanding, who's passionate about this and who really has a good track record of overcoming a novelty successfully, that has, and especially for early founders who are tackling like 50 problems at once, the fastest, cheapest, highest quality way of recruiting, which is hard to scale though, is referrals and going through the network.
Now, this, I guess, changes a lot once the organization is growing. What is the key to a successful recruitment process? For example, in a company that is around 100 employees up to where you are right now, I guess it's going to be a lot more about the quantity of candidates you can get through some process, right?
So this can also, the quantity can also depend on the particular role, geography, and the particular recruiter style. To be fair, with more senior, more specialized recruiters are more likely to have fewer high quality candidates, right? Um, but generally, especially in these sort of rapidly scaling environments, the biggest factor, so I would say there's three pieces to this, because when you want to hire quickly and you want to hire high quality people, right? And how do you achieve that? So one, having really good recruiters and finding them. You can apply some methodology in looking for them, but you won't know how they perform until they join, right? Second thing is having a really rigorously measured process, not just measuring actuals, but also measuring, where are you likely to end up? When are you likely to close the roles that you have open? And the third point is working with your hiring managers in a consistent, structured way, to ensure that they also have standardized, consistent, high quality ways of screening, and they're bought into the methods of how to make the hiring faster, they're available for interviews, right? So these are the three building blocks: the recruiters, the measurement, and working with the hiring managers.
In terms of the recruiters, so who is a good recruiter? Like, if I guess it really depends on the amount of candidates you can get through, you can get
Mm-hmm.
interested in the first place. It
Mm-hmm.
depends on like SDR almost processes plus
Mm-hmm.
marketing, like a lot of
Yeah.
marketing, right?
Yeah.
So what's the difference between a good and a better recruiter in terms of their approach or qualities?
So actually, similar to what's similar to SDRs is that the best recruiters have this drive to just like keep going at it, have the drive for closing the role, right? Like they have that perseverance. They keep finding new candidates, and they don't excited about one candidate, and they just keep having backups and like putting them through the funnel, and they have at least an intuitive understanding of the numbers game that they have to play in order to close a role within 10 weeks, let's say. Um, so that is a super important quality. Something that I've also seen consistently is that the best recruiters love the people. It's the hiring managers that they work with, it's the candidates that they work with. So it's not an easy job, right? Like you're talking to all these people and they reject you all the time, right? So really what gives you the energy is those relationships, that you have, that you nurture, and you meet someone, and that's what keeps you going, right? Aside from filling that role, but it's also the people on the way, so you enjoy the journey as well. um, and then, you know again, I'll go back to sort of the growth mindset and the self reflection. So that's also super important, because if we want recruiters, as any other employee, to keep growing at Bloomreach or in any other organization, um, they need to be able to reflect on the things that didn't work out, and be okay with not having done things well, and thinking about how they can change their ways, and honestly reflect on doing things slightly differently, so that they not just, even if they don't grow, this is going to be super important in landscapes where the uh, external conditions change, right? So you put them on a new type of role, or you have them working in a slightly newer geography, or the type of roles that we recruit for changes because we as a business change. So for all of these things to be future proof, the recruiters need that growth mindset. So I would say really the drive, the love for the people, and that growth mindset.
Maybe if you can also, and I think that will be the final point I will touch here in the recruitment, how to conduct the interviews.
Right.
Are there like uh, again, like, is there a lot of materials available out there? Do you have to tailor it for your particular proposition? What are the best practices right now?
In general, the best, sort of most structured process you can go through, and maybe the end goal that you want to get to, is defining the success for the role and why you are investing in that new hire, determining what kinds of capabilities are needed to drive that success, and then filtering for those capabilities in a structured way throughout the process, right? So that's the first part in terms of determining what to look for, right? And having sort of questions prepared with understanding what you're trying to hear in that answer, right? And having the hiring team aligned on this. But then in terms of the screening methods, so there's maybe three levels of how to approach this. What one level is asking these like general questions, like what do you think about X, right? And that's where you get sort of theoretical frameworks, and maybe something, and maybe there you can listen to what the person is mentioning and focusing on and what they're not. But really, it's not effective in terms of uncovering things, right? The second level of accuracy, which is slightly better, is what would you do if, right? And that's where you can maybe grill the candidate a little bit on stuff that is theoretical, hypothetical. What would you do in that scenario? Have different scenarios. And the last sort of highest accuracy are the sort of so-called behavioral questions, which are about past examples. Tell me the last time when you worked with someone who was difficult to work with, and how did that go? And you're listening for how did the person behave in that difficult situation in the past, which is actually your best indication of how they're going to behave in the future. And you're trying to extrapolate into the role that you're hiring for, right? So really determine the qualities and the capabilities that you're looking for, and then look for past examples that you can extrapolate into the future.
Isn't it true that sort of many candidates know what the answer should be? How much do you discover, or at least I would maybe expect it. I wasn't hiring that many people, but how do you discover, that the person is telling actually the truth in the process? Is it just their general feeling from the interview, and how they if you ask the right questions and the right volume, then the person who is lying will make a mistake, or how does it?
Well, I would maybe like to assume that folks don't intentionally lie in interview processes, right? Um, I would, however, assume that folks might exaggerate some of their
That is
achievements,
that is
right?
just what I wanted to say. Yeah, because it's like we've been through that many times. Like you need to self promote yourself and a little bit exaggerate or skew something to get
And
in
and
the best jobs. Right.
and where is that
Everyone
scale
does it.
between,
Yeah.
yeah, the European conservatism and maybe the American, like, yeah. And that's where it is useful to look at the past examples, right? Because you ask, okay, what was the problem in the beginning? What was your approach, and what was the outcome at the end? What exactly did you do, right? And tell me about the toughest thing in that process, and how did you approach that piece? And what would you have done if they said something slightly different in that situation, right? So when you get into a past example and into the nitty gritty, that's when you're able to, and when you're able to both listen for the answers that are actually being said, but also then listen for what the person did focus on or did not focus on, right? And something, maybe tying it back to the levels that we talked about, right? Thinking about whether the biggest challenge that someone mentions, right, that they approach, was it more operational, sort of day to day, or was it about how to reframe an entire approach and process, and really, set the direction for a particular team, right? So what is their level of thinking, and how did they respond to a challenge, and what do they consider their biggest challenge? So that exaggeration can sort of be approached through those past examples, and really knowing what you're looking for, and listening for it, right? And understanding if it's there or not.
And I think that this last useful advice is bringing me to the end. We've been talking for almost an hour. Thank you very much for this,
Of
Tomas.
course.
Maybe to just close and like final remark. Do you have any like good books that we could share with the listeners in for your to better understand culture, recruitment, HR in general? Or if not, we can then just add those books to the description of the episode.
Yeah, I'm looking at my shelf.
Mm-hmm.
So so in terms of there's two good pieces from HBR, and one is reinventing HR, which is slightly older. So their reinventing is pretty much the basics a lot of the time, but it's a good starting point. And then for working cross functionally with the different managers and doing some of that business partnering work, so that is about there's a book called Managing Up and Across from HBR. And then something that I received as a recommendation, and a book that I keep coming back to is and I think this is maybe an evergreen, is work rules. Right. So these would be the three that would first come to mind.
Thank you very much. And we can maybe then add more into the description. It's always useful. Cool. Thanks very much again, Tomas. And thank you everyone for listening. And hopefully we'll see each other soon, Tomas, and we'll definitely hear each other soon, the listeners. So thanks very much and have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day.
And that's it for today's episode of the Startup Huddle. Thank you very much for listening, and make sure to catch all episodes on thestartuphuddle.com and follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter for more insights and updates on the world of startups. Thanks again for tuning in.